I am curious about what Shawn has to say.
What Shawn has to say.
Line 8.
Is it? Oh, the neither or both.
Yeah.
Shawn from Minneapolis. You claim you're stuck between two things you can't be stuck between. So maybe there's some confusion we can get through.
I'm curious.
Well, the answer is, okay, are you atheist or theist? And the answer is, I don't know.
Okay, that's fair.
That's a better answer, yeah.
So, okay.
Do you actually actively believe that there is a God?
No. But the things that I can't let go of are numinous things. And Matt, I know you're a musician. At least from watching some of the shows, you've made allusions to the music. And if you've ever performed,
I wouldn't call myself a musician, and neither would most of the people who've seen me play. But thanks.
Well, you've played, so I give you the credit.
Sure.
When you're playing music, there are points in time where you're channeling something that is beyond yourself.
No. That is an assertion that I wholeheartedly reject. How could you possibly reach that conclusion and demonstrate it?
I can't.
Okay, then why would you assert something that you cannot demonstrate at all?
Because it's the numinous is a personal experience, and in the introduction, I waffled between theism and atheism a couple different times in my life, and the thing about atheism I can't come to terms with is the personal experience of something larger than myself, a greater good, something, you're doing something and you're kind of got a mental block, and all of a sudden you just start channeling something. I don't know where this is coming from, but wow, am I having this productively creative moment, and look at this.
Shawn,
Yes,
the fact that you want to describe it as channeling something from outside of you doesn't mean that it is. Is there any evidence that it's anything other than your brain?
No.
Then why would you believe it's anything other than your brain?
It's hard. It's hard.
No, I did right, because in my brain, I have the emotional state that I have. I have the history and the trauma and all the stuff that is in the past. And then you have these breakthroughs that are, hey, I'm a better person now. I just had this epiphany, and it's just, as an atheist, just reject that stuff happens. I can't.
No, I'm not rejecting that stuff happens. I'm saying you have no way to demonstrate that this epiphany comes from anything other than your brain. Your brain is a thought machine. It is incredibly complex. And the mistake that we make is saying, oh, right now I'm having a mental block. And then a moment later, something happens and you have an epiphany. There's no reason to think that came from outside of you. Your mental block is gone.
Can I tell you something, Shawn?
Yeah.
Those feelings of something greater than you can get those feelings after you admit to yourself that you don't believe that there's a God. Because I have had those since deconverting.
Well, I've deconverted and reconverted and deconverted a couple different times, and this is the last thing that I have that on either side of the fence, they both leave me wanting. And
okay, let me try this. Let me try this, Shawn. As soon as I say go, I want you to give me a number between 1 and 1,000. 1, 2, 3, go.
Okay, I got it. 17.
17. Where did that number come from? Did it come from your brain? What did it pop into your brain? Did it feel like something pushed it into your brain? Was it an epiphany? Why 17 and why not 423?
No, I get it, and that's the part about this situation that I failed to describe. That is, it's not a controllable thing.
The thing is, you have to keep asking yourself questions like this. Allow your brain to explore thinking like this, because I learned really quickly, I didn't know how to ask questions. I didn't know how to wonder. I just had these things like, oh, well, that's obviously, something higher power. That's obviously this. That's obviously that. I just had all of these assumptions in my head that I had never chosen to believe. I just assumed so many things. And then once I finally decided to take it apart and say, okay, why do I assume that this is from a greater good rather than just good? You know, and each one of those little things that make you just feel so uncomfortable, break it down as much as you can. Okay, what is it that I think it is? What is it that I think that it's doing, and why? To everything that gives you that uncomfortable feeling. You know what I mean?
There isn't discomfort.
There's no discomfort at all?
No. There's just a gap. There's a gap. And gaps, I like to explore gaps. I'm an engineer, and so for me, you know, I know what I've been told, I know what I've been read, and I can synthesize what I've been told and what I've read. And then there's this third category of things of, wow, these are things that I've experienced that don't always line up with what I've been told and what I've read. And and I'm not talking about the alien abduction thing that is, you know, all bizarre and weird. An example is in my job, there are moments where team is presented with a problem and you go, holy cow, how are we going to deal with this problem? I'll go into the office by myself, and you just kind of start working the problem, and you kind of get into this meditative state, and you just start typing, and you're working with the tools, and then it's all done, and you go review it the next day. People say, how did you come up with that? And my answer is, I don't know. Help me understand what I came up with, because it's not a conscious thing that I went through, like a very logical sequence of thinking. It's just, it's a creative process, and it just happens.
Yeah, and there's no reason to think that it's coming from outside of you, because we can certainly tap into, we tend to like view our brain as if it's, you know, one thing, it's me. But there's memory, there's preferences, there's what's coming in from different receptors at different time. You know, if somebody says, why do you feel hungry? I could say, well, I can get the sensations from my belly, and so that's causing me to feel this. But if somebody's like, why do you like this particular type of music? I don't know. Maybe it's because that played at some point when I was happy. I may not be aware of what the connection is. But how did you write this particular song? Well, I don't know. But I live in a world where I've learned things about writing songs, and I've listened to many songs, and I take bits and pieces of different things and put them together. There's an argument to be made that everything that we ever come up with is derivative, that there's nothing truly original. Like you couldn't even think of anything truly original. It is all a varied product on what we know and understand. The fact that you at any given moment don't have access to why your brain thinks a certain thing, whether it's 17 or 423, is in no way indicative that it's coming from outside of you. That would need to be demonstrated. And all of the evidence points to, you know, there are people who are more creative than others. There are people who are able to come up with things. Maybe your method, some people's method might be, let me meditate and calm my mind to get the distractions out of the way to focus. Somebody else, somebody with ADHD, may be able to focus on a whole bunch of different things at once, and that may be where they are in fact most productive. Other people may be incredibly not productive then. But the fact that you don't know how your brain works completely doesn't in any way indicate that there's something external tinkering with your brain. And how weird would that be if, when you thought of the number 17, or you came up with this particular solution as an engineer, that was some divine entity forcing a thought into your head? I mean, how terrifying and bizarre is that? Because if that being exists, why can't they present the evidence of their existence?
Right. And this thing that I describe, and that when these experience happens, there isn't like an agent or an agency in any of this. It is like a connection to something, and you just kind of, oh, it's kind of interesting. Let's kind of just channel that. And
it's fine to say it's like a connection to something, because now you're in the realm of simile. But it's not justified to say it is a connection to something external.
Right. And the thing that triggers my interest is I can explain this, kind of experience with other people that have similar experience. There's not a lot of people, but creative types tend to have this similar, and they will describe things in a similar way. And I get the alien abduction thing. I'm not going down that path, because these people, it isn't a priori. They heard this. Oh, I'm going to have that experience too. It's more you just kind of get together and say, how does this work for you? And they say, well, I can't really tell you how it works.
Yeah, I don't know how this gets to being stuck about whether or not there's a God. You either have evidence for a God and a justified reason to believe it, or you believe it without evidence, or you don't believe it.
Yeah, and I'm in the middle.
There's no middle between I am convinced there's a God and I'm not convinced there's a God. There is no middle.
No, right. Yeah, I get that.
I can understand people vacillating, like, oh, sometimes I'm leaning this way or sometimes I'm leaning that way, because we're not the same all the time. But there's no middle between I am convinced and I'm not convinced. It's a truly binary, direct logical negation. I am convinced, I am not convinced. Those are the only two options.
Right. And
that's true for everyone. That's why I didn't say I am convinced there's a God and I'm not convinced. It's true for everything. I am convinced there's a cup of iced tea on the desk next to me. I am not convinced there's a cup of iced tea on the desk next to me. It works for everything. That's the way logic is. If there's a direct logical negation, those are the only two options.
Yes. And as an engineer, when we write software systems, you have, is it true? Is it not true? Or is it, we don't know yet? And we have to code for that a lot. And so I get the logical, the way you break this down in very logical sense, that you have the excluded middle, you can't have that. But in my engineering education, we actually have to deal with the excluded middle sometimes. So,
I just toggled a bit. Is it a 1?
No, I get that. I don't know. I'd have to test.
I don't either. But we know that it's a 1 or a 0. But what we believe about it is also binary. Do you believe it's a 1? You either believe it's a 1 or you don't believe it's a 1. And that also applies with you either believe it's a 0 or you don't believe it's 0. But there's no middle ground. You are either convinced of one of those propositions or you are not convinced.
Well, there's the case where you don't know yet, and you have to test to see.
Okay. Whether or not you know is not relevant. There's still only two positions. You either believe it is A or not A, or you do not believe it's A.
What is that position called when you're in the middle of a guess? Like when you say, for example, guess a number between 1 and 100, and I say, 7. And I'm waiting for you to confirm, oh, is that a 7 or not? And so I'm saying, I don't know yet, but maybe it's a 7. So is that what you're referring to, Shawn? Some kind of like middle ground?
There's a point in time when the answer is out there and you don't know what it is until you ask the question. And once you ask the question, you get the data back that can tell you. And some of the things that are out there,
but there's
I don't know if I'd asked all the questions yet.
So we're not talking about the same thing. If the answer is out there and you don't know it, or you're not aware of it, then you either have a justified belief of what the answer is, or you don't. Those are still the only options.
Right. I agree with you.
Okay. Because there's what the answer is, what you believe about the answer. Those are separate things. And so
the answer is,
if you know, for example, like if I flip a coin, you know that I've flipped a coin. You can observe me doing it, but you don't know whether the coin has landed heads up or tails up. But we do know, unless I'm cheating, that it has either landed heads up or tails up. And so if somebody says it's heads, they could possibly have a justified reason for believing that it has landed head side up. For example, they might have handed me a coin that has heads on both sides, or they might have seen it just as it landed, or whatever else. But if genuinely we don't know, then you still, I'm not saying you either believe it's heads or tails. I'm saying you either believe it's heads or you don't believe it's heads, or you believe it's tails or you don't believe it's tails. Within logic, we assess propositions independently, not two propositions. It's not proposition A is it landed head side up, proposition B is it landed tail side up, and you have to pick one of those. That's not it. It's a single proposition that we're evaluating.
Oh, I understand that.
Okay.
So do you believe that there's a God?
Say that again, Jenna?
I'm sorry. I was just wondering, do you believe that there is a God?
No.
Okay. Cool.
Then
that's fair.
Yeah. And if that changes, then it changes.
Right. It doesn't mean that has to be, the answer has to be no.
I'd spend some time. I'd spend some time looking into the neuroscience related to creativity and stuff. But basically, as far as I know, as far as I'm aware, there isn't an answer. But there also, to the, like, why did I think of this instead of this? And it may be that it's all deterministic, and you could not have possibly thought of any number other than 17, given everything that's happened in the universe leading up to that moment when I said go. And we can't test that because we don't have a time machine. We can't rewind. And if we could, we would already be changing the circumstances.
We don't have a second model to compare it to.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm going to try to get to another call before we're done. But I appreciate it. And don't beat up on yourself so much. Yep, you have experiences that feel like you're channeling something else outside of you. Okay, cool. It's I don't find anything to be worried about. I remember, like, we have illusions of, like, if you cross your fingers and put a pencil between your fingers, you can get a particular sensory illusion about what's happening there. And if you did it with your eyes closed, there's plenty of, there's actually an entire magic trick that I've done in the past where the person on stage is having a completely different experience from everybody else because they are keeping their eyes closed and witnessing miracles while the audience actually sees what's going on. But from their perspective, it's miracles. That feeling of awe, or I don't know why my brain came up with this, or is the universe entirely deterministic? Those are all unknowns. It's not until we know that we would then be justified saying, yep, I'm channeling a God, or I'm channeling a muse, or whatever.
Okay. Well, thank you, Matt and Jenna. I appreciate you taking my call.
Yep.
Thanks for calling, Shawn.
All right.